Hi, my name is Sean Chapman. I teach at North Scott High School up in Eldridge, and I was asked to do a short 10-minute lesson that we might use in our classes. I thought I would choose a poem that I love to talk about some important elements of the music of language. And when we talk about the music of language, you're really focusing on three main things to sort of help you understand why poets made the choices that they made: assonance, alliteration, and consonance. And I'll talk about all three of those. But the first thing I think I should do is simply read the poem that I'll be talking about. So I'm going to pause for a second and let you look at the words as I read the poem to you. It's a great poem that uses a lot of music in language, and so I think it's a good choice for this. I hope you like it. Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house. Speaking indifferently to him, who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? All right, so you've heard the poem, and this is something that I talk to my students about a lot, that poetry is meant to be listened to. It's meant to be read and thought about. So in the best case scenario, you would take a moment and maybe read the poem out loud yourself, think about what it means, but we don't have that time. So I'm just going to sort of go over some general ideas about the poem before I get into talking about the music of the poem and how it works. So those Winter Sundays, Robert Hayden, African-American author, he was the first poet laureate, the first African-American poet laureate. He had a tough life, a tough childhood growing up, and I think some biographical information is useful when you're talking about poetry. And so I think it's important to know that he had a rough relationship with his dad and his foster parents in general. So that's what this poem is about. It's about a son who realizes too late the sacrifices that their father made for them. So I might go back and forth between showing you the poem and just talking about it, but it begins, Sundays too, my father got up early. So he did this always. He was working as a laborer. It says he put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Really good words to get across how freezing it was where they lived and where his father worked. His hands, it says, were cracked. They ached from labor in the weekday weather. So his usual job wore him out, made him rough. And then on Sundays, the father would get up early, polishing shoes, probably getting ready for church. I talk about that with students, trying to make inferences. What can they realize by something as small as maybe where the poet says, Sundays too, my father got up early, and talks about polishing our good shoes, getting ready for Sunday school or church. And what the son didn't realize, and the adult son does, is the sacrifices that the father made for his family. And it's this realization that comes too late, I'd argue, that you can hear at the end of the poem, that the poet is sort of sad that he wasn't able to understand this and express it to his father while he was alive. One of the things that I think it's important to tell students and anybody who cares about poetry is that one of the mistakes I think teachers can sometimes make is sort of presenting poems as some complex puzzle with one solution, and the teacher knows that solution, and it's your job to decode it using your decoder ring that the teacher provides you. And I just think this is a dangerous way to think about poems. I do believe some direction is important. So pay attention to biographical information, as I said. Pay attention, know your terms, know alliteration and assonance and consonants. But also be open to your ideas and the way that you are looking at the poem. You might discover something that nobody else has seen. So I think it's really important to think of poems as being about a topic and considering one specific topic, but at the same time, there's room for play and discovery and fascination from the students. So I think it's really crucial. All right, so after we've read through the poem and talked about it, I've introduced these three major terms that I want the students to practice with: assonance, alliteration, and consonants. And I want to sort of review those with you really quickly, show you some examples from the text, and then sort of get into how I feel that the music works in the poem. All right, so the first one, remember, it was assonance. And assonance, as it says on the screen, is just using vowel sounds to create small echoes in poems. And all three of these techniques really just create these echoes. And what I'm interested in this poem is how the different sounds sort of shift as the poem is moving on. Remember, you start the poem in the cold, the blue-black cold, but then by the end of the poem is this realization that that the father was warmer than the child thought, that there were things going on in the background that the grown child is only beginning to understand. Next on our list of terms is alliteration, which is just using initial sounds to create those echoes. So I'm sorry to review a tiny bit. Assonance is that ached and labor and weekday, all those long A sounds. Alliteration, though, is initial sounds. So it would be at the beginning of the word. So clothes and cold and cracked. And on my notes, I write all those hard C's, and I do want you to listen to that cracking sound. Finally, there's consonants, which is repeated sound. It's usually consonants that are close together in the poem, again, to create this sort of echo or glue that helps hold the poem together. Thanked and wake and breaking. So all those K's, that K, again, pretty hard, harsh sound. So taking our knowledge of those three terms and seeing how they work, what I'd like to do now is show you the poem again and sort of highlight a few of those shifts that happen. When you begin the poem with the first stanza, you've got these harsher sounds like clothes and blue, black, cold, all those K sounds that start words. There are a couple of examples of alliteration in there with cracked and clothes and cold. But you also have these pretty harsh A sounds like ached and labor and weekday weather. So these sharp sounds with the K's and the hard A's in there, the long A vowel sound. Whereas as you move forward in the poem, you move into the warmer parts when the rooms were warm, so it's an ah sound, not that ah or the a sound, and then ooh, the rooms, and slowly we would, all those W's, which are nice warm sounds. House itself is a warm sound. Cold, even in this case, seems a little bit comforting towards the end of the poem, where it was so freezing and blue black in the beginning. Now it's something more positive. If you look at just the music in poems, sometimes you can try to understand and get to know a little bit more about the meaning. Thanks for listening. Again, that was Robert Hayden's Those Winter Sundays. I'm Sean Chapman from North Scott High School, and I really appreciate this. You all take care out there.